Hello, my name is Allison Kennedy, and today I am going to show you how to turn a nice flat tabular data model such as this into something that we can use for a Sankey visual such as this one here. So the data that we ultimately need the data to look like excuse me, is we're looking for one column for source, one column for destination, and I'm looking for population so that I can give a weighting value for the width of each of these links and these nodes. So somehow I need to take this data that has the birthplace and the residence and turn it into something that has the source and destination. Now, we could just use birthplace, residence, and population as our source and destination, and I'll show you what that will look like and why that's not quite what we're looking for. So I'm just going to load this data. This data I've just gotten from nz.stat. It's the NZ census data from 2018, so I'm working with real statistics. And I'm going to go and grab the Sankey visual from the custom visual marketplace. Perfect. So now that we've got that visual, we can put the visual on our page, and you'll see that it's asking for source, destination, and weight. So, like we said, we could put birthplace as our source. And the destination is, of course, their residence. So we'll add that to the destination. And so you'll see that we've got all of the different countries where people were born and which part of Auckland they're going to. Everything looks the same height, so I'm going to add the population into weight so that we can see how many people. So you can see most people were born in New Zealand. However, we've got quite a few people who were born overseas as well. Okay? And I'm actually going to filter out the New Zealand population. And then we've got China, India, and then we're going down into different countries. Right? So that's pretty cool, pretty handy. However, if I wanted to put region in there, I lose my country. Alright, so what I want to get is I want to have that multi-level, that multi-tiered, coming from a certain region through a certain country into our destination, what city or region within New Zealand. Okay, so in order to get this multi-tiered effect, we need to manipulate our data a little bit. So I'm going to go back into Power Query, and I'm going to show you what I've done to transform the data for that end result. So we know that birthplace and residence works. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to take this NZ census table and I'm going to reference it. And we will call this birthplace to residence. So this is the smallest level of granularity that I have about their birthplace. This is the country that they were born in. And then we've got the region, which gets a little bit bigger. And then we've got that group, which gets even larger from there. So I've started with the smallest level, birthplace, to residence. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to transform this and group by those two columns. So I need to go into advanced so that I can group by two columns. So I'm going to group by birthplace and residence. And then I want the population as a sum of the total population. Voila! So now I've got my birthplace, which I'm going to call source, and my residence, which I'm going to rename destination. Now I'm renaming these source and destination for a couple of reasons. One is that's what it's called in the Sankey visual, so it's going to keep me from getting too confused. And two, I now want to add another layer of leveling, and I'm going to need to combine them all into one table at some point, so they need to have the same column headings. So I'm going to repeat the same process. Reference the NZ census table. And this time, we're going to go up a level higher. So we did birthplace to residence. Now we're going to take the region to the birthplace. So this is going to be region to birthplace. And again, we're going to group by advanced, group by region, then by birthplace, population, and sum the population. Rename source destination. And then we're going to repeat that process one more time. Right click, reference the NZ census table, and this one is finally going to be group to region. So I'm going to group by the group and then by region. And we'll put our population in here. Now I could have duplicated my queries and made some slight changes to them, but I've decided to repeat the process 3 times to help drill into your heads how we've made this happen. Right, so I now am going to take these 3 tables and I am going to group them, and I'm going to call these my Sankey reference. And just for completeness, we'll move this to a group and call this raw data. Now I'm not using any of these tables. Well, I am, but I'm not going to want to use any of these tables in my report, so I'm not going to load any of them to the final report. Instead, what I'd like to do is I would like to create a new query that appends all of my Sankey tables. Don't need one twice. So we're going to append birthplace to residence, region to birthplace, group to region. So group to region, region to birthplace, birthplace to residence. We've got all our bases covered. It has a logical order, so we can see the flow of the data from group to region, to birthplace to residence. And that's important. You don't want to miss any steps or any nodes along the way. So we'll click OK. And what that is going to do is create one big long table of all of those subsets of data that we've got. So we'll just call this the Sankey data table. And so you'll see that we've got the birthplace, the original birthplace of New Zealand, and their destination is Waitemata. And we've got that population of the 349,125 people. All right. But if we go through here, we'll be able to see that New Zealand is a destination and the source was New Zealand. So we don't have any subgroupings with New Zealand like we do with the Pacific Islands or some of the other countries, right? So I've just written that different way, and that's important. We need to spell that differently for that to pick it up as a different node, and we'll talk about that later as well, what happens when the source and destination are the same. So we've got New Zealand going to NZ, and then you'll see that New Zealand is down here and coming from Oceania, right? And so that's got all of those people and where they're moving to. So we've got the 920,000 people from New Zealand, and that should be the same number that we've got for the New Zealand to New Zealand, but then they break out and we've got all of our New Zealand going to 3 different areas in Auckland. So I'm going to close and apply this data. This is going to break this original visual here because we don't have the NZ census table being loaded anymore, so that's going to give us an error and we'll replace it with our Sankey data table. Perfect. So we're now going to take our source and our destination, and you can see that we've now got multiple nodes of data. So we've got people coming from Africa, going into North Africa and the Middle East, and then going into the different countries in Africa, and then going into the different regions of Auckland. Okay. So we've got Oceania, going into Australia, going into New Zealand, going into NZ and Oz, and then going into the different cities or the different regions in Auckland. Okay. So this data set now has those multiple nodes and those multiple layers that we were looking for. And if we add our population weighting in, now we can see where most of the people are coming from. Most of them are coming from Oceania, which makes sense because most of them are living in New Zealand, were also born in New Zealand. So what we can do is we can do a filter, and we can remove New Zealand as a destination. So you'll see that that's gotten rid of the link between Oceania and New Zealand. And then we can also remove New Zealand as a source, and that's going to get rid of this link here as well. So we'll select everything, and then we'll remove the NZ and the New Zealand from the source. Voila. So that's starting to look a little bit better. Now you'll see the importance of having the complete data. So here I've got some people who, or some countries that have been marked as other, Oceania and Antarctica, but we didn't have any destination for them, so the flow of the data ends there, and that's significant. That tells you something about your data. In this case, it's telling me that I've got mismatching values, but in energy flow, for example, we could see that that's the terminal point of that data flow, as opposed to having it continue going. You'll also notice sometimes that it'll skip some of the tiers and it'll go straight from here all the way to this level, so on and so forth. So that's it. I've done this on just a subset of the data, but for simplicity's sake, but the original complete data file, you can get the complete data from nz.stat, and you'll see that when you're working on the complete data file, we've got all of those links. So when you don't filter out for just certain regions of New Zealand and you've got everyone, the whole population, we don't have any of those incomplete paths. So everybody who was born somewhere overseas also has somewhere to live in New Zealand. Whereas when I am only looking at Auckland, we get some of those incomplete paths, and it's quite a different picture.